What is resentment? Resentment is anger with nowhere to go. Something happened, a betrayal, a disrespect, an injustice, and the natural anger that should have moved through the body and cleared out instead got trapped. Trapped anger doesn't disappear. It converts into something else, bitterness, a running commentary in the back of the mind about what someone did and why it wasn't fair. What does resentment mean in practical terms? It means a single event stopped being an event and became a condition. One moment replayed daily until the replay feels like a permanent part of a person instead of a memory they're carrying. Resentment shows up everywhere, but it hits hardest inside close relationships. Resentment in a relationship often builds the same way small debts build in a household budget. Nobody notices the first one. A partner says something dismissive during an argument, and it doesn't get addressed. A friend cancels plans one too many times, and it doesn't get said out loud. A family member takes credit for something, and it goes unspoken. None of these register as a crisis on their own, but they get logged internally, one after another, until the person carrying them has built an entire ledger without the other person even knowing an account was open. Where does resentment come from? The deepest source is a simple mechanism. Most people tie their sense of worth to how they get treated by others. Respect feels like proof of value. Disrespect feels like an attack on that value. And the mind reaches for the fastest available response. Anger is that response, because anger feels like strength in a moment that otherwise feels like weakness. What causes resentment specifically beyond that mechanism? A few patterns show up again and again. Unmet expectations that never got voiced out loud. Boundaries that got crossed repeatedly without consequence. Sacrifices one person made that went unnoticed or unreciprocated. Old wounds from childhood or past relationships getting triggered by something small in the present, so the reaction is bigger than the moment actually calls for. In every case, the anger that should have moved through instead got stored, and storage is where resentment begins. What does resentment feel like on the inside? A tight chest when a certain name comes up, a rehearsed argument running in the background of an unrelated task, a sense of being owed something that never gets collected, sleep that doesn't fully rest because part of the mind stayed on guard all night. Small irritations that seem to arrive from nowhere but actually trace straight back to an old, unresolved account. What does resentment look like from the outside? It rarely looks like open anger. More often, it looks like distance. A partner who goes quiet during conflict instead of engaging. A friend who agrees to plans and then finds reasons to cancel. A family member who brings up an old mistake during an unrelated disagreement, seemingly out of nowhere, because the old mistake never actually left. It looks like sarcasm that has an edge to it. It looks like keeping score. It looks like a smile that doesn't fully reach the eyes because trust took a hit that never got repaired. Resentment operates on 3 levels at once, and understanding all 3 is what makes the full picture clear. Mentally, it hijacks attention. An event that lasted minutes gets replayed for years, and every replay pulls focus away from what's actually happening right now. Conversations get half listened to because part of the mind is still stationed at an old battlefield. Physically, it keeps the body in a low-grade state of threat response. The nervous system doesn't know the difference between an actual danger happening right now and a memory of danger from years back. Cortisol rises, sleep gets disturbed, muscles stay tense. Over years, this chronic activation contributes to real physical wear, including elevated blood pressure, weakened immune function, and higher risk for conditions tied to chronic stress. Relationally, it poisons connections that have nothing to do with the original injury. Someone who got hurt by one person starts treating everyone through the lens of that hurt. Trust gets rationed by default instead of in response to an actual threat. How resentment can destroy a relationship is worth walking through step by step, because the damage rarely arrives all at once. It starts with silence. Something happens that deserves a conversation, and the conversation doesn't happen, either because it feels too small to bring up, or because bringing it up feels like starting a fight nobody wants, so it gets swallowed instead. Swallowed issues don't disappear, they get filed. And filed issues change how a person shows up in the relationship going forward, even without a single new incident. A partner starts approaching conversations with quiet defensiveness. Small requests start feeling like additional burdens on top of an invisible pile. Warmth that used to come easily starts requiring more effort to assess. Eventually, the original issue gets buried under newer ones, but the emotional charge from the old ones doesn't go away. It just gets attached to whatever's happening now. This is why arguments in long-term relationships often escalate far past what the current issue would justify. The fight isn't really about who forgot to do the dishes. It's about every time something similar happened and never got addressed. Left unaddressed long enough, resentment can hollow out a relationship from the inside while the outside still looks intact. Two people can share a home, a schedule, and a routine, while one or both of them have built a case against the other that's never been spoken out loud. By the time it surfaces, if it surfaces at all, both people are often surprised by how much weight was actually being carried underneath what looked like a normal, functional relationship. Left unaddressed, resentment doesn't sit still, it compounds. The first cost is time. Every moment spent replaying an old injury is a moment that didn't go towards something productive. Multiply that across weeks, months, years, and the total becomes enormous, measured not in abstract terms, but in actual hours that could have gone toward work, relationships, health, or rest. The second cause is identity distortion. The longer resentment runs unaddressed, the more central it becomes to how someone sees themselves. What started as a reaction to a specific injury starts to calcify into a personality trait. Someone who was hurt once turns guarded or cynical as a baseline, and eventually that baseline feels less like a wound and more like who they are, which makes it even harder to address. The third cost is displacement. Unprocessed resentment toward one person often gets redirected toward people who had nothing to do with the original injury. A partner gets punished for a parent's failure. A coworker gets treated with suspicion earned by someone from years back. The fourth cost, and the one with the highest long-term price, is physical health. Chronic stress from unresolved resentment has been linked repeatedly to cardiovascular problems, digestive issues, weakened immune response, and higher rates of anxiety and depression. Underneath all four is the deepest cost of all, the years themselves. Nobody gets those years back. The person who caused the original damage isn't paying any of these costs. The one paying is the one still carrying it. How to stop resentment starts with understanding that it isn't a single moment of realization. It's a process, and it has specific, learnable steps. Step 1. Accept what actually happened. Acceptance does not mean agreement, and it does not mean saying what happened was acceptable. Acceptance means the internal fight against the fact that it happened finally stops. A huge portion of resentment is a hidden argument with the past, a repeated insistence that things should have gone differently. They didn't. The sooner the argument ends, the sooner energy becomes available for something other than replaying it. Step 2. Separate the event from the ongoing story. The event happened once. The story about it gets rebuilt daily, often with new details layered on, new grievances discovered in the retelling. How to cope with resentment day to day often comes down to noticing the gap between what actually happened and the version currently being carried around, which is usually more elaborate and more painful than the original. Step 3. Take ownership of what happens next. This is where accountability enters, and it needs a precise definition. Accountability does not mean taking blame for someone else's actions. If someone caused harm, that responsibility belongs to them, fully. Accountability means taking ownership of the response going forward. Regardless of who caused the wound, only one person can close it, and it isn't the person who caused it. Step 4. Redefine forgiveness correctly. This is often the missing piece in how to fix resentment. Forgiveness does not mean saying what happened was fine. It does not mean reestablishing contact with someone still harmful. It does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness is a decision to stop paying an ongoing cost for something that already happened and cannot be undone. It's a decision made for the person carrying the weight, not a gift handed to the person who caused it. The event stays real. The harm stays real. What changes is the daily payment. Forgiveness closes the account. It doesn't rewrite the ledger. Forgiveness also doesn't require a feeling to show up first. Most people wait to feel ready before they forgive, and that feeling can take years to arrive on its own, if it arrives at all. The decision comes first. The feeling follows the decision, usually slowly, sometimes unevenly, but it follows. Step 5. Build self-acceptance alongside the forgiveness. This step gets skipped constantly, and skipping it is why forgiveness alone sometimes doesn't stick. A lot of resentment carries a second layer underneath the anger at the other person. Anger at the self for allowing the situation, for not seeing it sooner, for staying too long, for reacting badly in the moment it happened. The second layer needs its own attention. Self-acceptance here means dropping the ongoing trial against an earlier version of the self who didn't know what they know now. Nobody had access to information they hadn't learned yet. A person who trusted too easily, missed warning signs, or reacted from pain instead of clarity was working with what they had at the time. Judging that earlier self by standards only available in hindsight is an unfair trial with a predetermined verdict. Practically, this means separating two different sentences that often gets fused together. I made a mistake and I am the mistake are not the same claim, and only one of them is true. Self-acceptance keeps the first sentence and drops the second one entirely. Without this step, forgiving the other person can end up feeling hollow because the courtroom in the mind never actually shut down. It just changed who was on trial. Step 6. Stop waiting for external permission to heal. Waiting for an apology, an admission, or an acknowledgement before allowing peace to return keeps healing dependent on choices that may never come. None of these steps require the other person to do anything. That's the entire point. Healing that depends on someone else's actions is healing that can get delayed indefinitely. Healing that depends only on a person's decision, forgiveness of them, and acceptance of the self can start today, immediately, regardless of what the other person ever says or does. Resentment convinces people that holding on is protection, that staying angry is justice, and that letting go means the other person wins. None of that holds under examination. The person being resented isn't affected by any of it. The only one affected is the one carrying it, every single day, in the body, in the relationships, in the hours that keep getting handed over to something already finished. Enough years are already gone. That part is settled. What happens to the years still coming is the only thing left to decide, and that decision gets made today